talk about printmaking. Printmaking is a process in which one image is made onto a surface and then it's transferred onto a number of other surfaces. So it's it's a technique that allows for multiples, and it's also indirect because you're creating an image on usually a hard surface known as a matrix. And then paper is placed onto that matrix that's run through a press, and then a certain number of prints come out on the press. The number of prints is called an edition. And so an artist may run an edition of 100 prints, they may run an edition of 10 prints, they may run an edition of 2 prints. But after the artist has decided that no more prints are to be made, the edition is complete, the artist a lot of times kind of scratch an X through the matrix so that nobody can come along later and make unauthorized prints from the matrix. So the types of printmaking are relief, intaglio, lithography, screen printing, and monotype printing. Relief printing is something you're probably more familiar with than you think. A relief is basically a stamp. If you just take a look at the bottom of your shoes, your running shoes, I should say, or your athletic shoes, you know that there's a very elaborate design carved in the bottom of your shoe, and if you step in some water or some mud, you leave a print. You leave a footprint when you walk on the floor, and what happens is you can see the design that was carved into the bottom of your shoe because only the elevated areas on your shoe received the mud and were able to transfer that mud onto the floor. So if you look at this cross section right here, you think about the A is the matrix and the B is the paper, and just the elevated areas, ink was rolled onto that block, and then when paper was pressed onto it and peeled away, the ink transferred onto the paper. So the 3 types of relief printing are wood cut, wood engraving, and linoleum cut. Here is a great example of a wood cut matrix, or what I would refer to as a wood block. The artist has carved away all the areas that are going to be the white on the paper, and all the areas that are elevated, you can see they've already rolled ink onto it. So all the areas that are elevated are the parts that receive and transfer the ink. And so when this is transferred to paper, you would see a reverse image of the flying horse. Okay. And there are some really good videos in this week's Read Watch This that go with all of the things I'm showing you here. So I want to make sure that you take the time to watch those and get a better example of what happens during these kinds of processes. So here is a Japanese woodblock print from 1857, actually showing women engaging in the relief process in an art studio. So you can see here's this woman carving into the wood, another woman hanging the prints up to dry. Another woman mixing some colors, and you see all the dyes and the inks over here. Okay. Wood engraving is very similar to wood cut, but it's a more refined way of working. They work on, instead of with the long grain of the wood, they work on the short end of the wood, the short grain. So it's a lot less of the wood. It's a lot less of the wood texture showing through, and they use a finer tool. This is Jose Guadalupe Posada. You may be familiar with his work. This is 100 years old, or over 100 years ago, but it still remains very, very popular today. And his wood engravings of skeletons were actually stand-ins for political figures, and it was very satirical and political. And these would be printed in the newspaper, and it was a way of kind of criticizing public officials without actually naming anybody. Okay. Another type of release print is linoleum cut. Same exact thing. You're removing the white areas, and the raised part receives the ink. But this is much easier to carve into. So a lot of times with art students, this will be the first type of relief that they do, because it's literally like the linoleum tile you have on your floor. The plate doesn't last as long. So you can't make as many prints in your edition because it's soft, and so it starts to kind of come apart. Okay, intaglio is the opposite of relief in that the plate is prepared so that, again, there's parts that are gouged or carved away, but the ink settles down into the recessed area, and the top, the smooth part of the plate, is wiped clean of ink. So when you put the paper on it, it's forced in a press, it's forced down into the little crevices, and ink only is received by the areas that are where the ink is, which is receded. So there's two types, etching and engraving. And again, I have some videos in the Read Watch This folder for you to look at that give you a really good idea of how this is done. I wanted to show you what an engraving plate looks like. It's a copper plate, and you can see that they're carving into the metal plate with very sharp tools. They put ink on the plate, and it seeps down into the cracks, and then you can see that the plate has been wiped clean. So when paper is placed on it and it's run into the press, the paper will be pushed down into those areas where you see the ink, and you'll see a reverse of this image. There's a couple videos in this week's Read Watch This about Albrecht Dürer, and this is one of his famous engravings from 1513 called Night, Death, and the Devil. The knight that you see here is the symbol of the righteous Christian who is fearlessly marching forward through the a valley of uncertainty. There's all kinds of scary things going on around him. Here's death with his reminder, his hourglass, which is always a reminder of death. The devil over here, his dog faithfully riding by his side. The dog, when you see it in Renaissance art, is always about faithfulness. He is marching up here towards the kingdom of heaven, proceeding fearlessly past the devil and death. I wanted you to also notice the little lizard down here in the lower right. He's also a symbol of the devil, and he's running in the opposite direction. So, okay. So etching is a lot like engraving in that it's an intaglio process, but you're actually scratching into a wax coating that's been placed on the metal surface, and then that plate is placed in a vat of acid where it eats away. So the artist here is kind of just drawing with a needle in doing a lot of cross hatching into the waxy surface on the plate. After the plate has been in the acid bath, the waxy substance will be removed and the ink will be applied, and just the same process happens with the press. And so one of the best known, or the one of the best artists of all time really is Rembrandt. And he had a series of religious biblical scenes that he did with etching. And so here you see Christ preaching, and I wanted you to just look at all of the cross-hatching that he did to use to create dark values to get these areas to kind of recede into the background. And there is an article in this week's Read Watch This about Rembrandt that I want you to read. Lithography is drawn on a stone. So what this piece of this right here is a great big piece of limestone. I was going to say sandstone. It's limestone. It's drawn onto with a greasy crayon, and then it's gotten wet with a sponge. You roll ink onto it while it's wet, and the ink only sticks to the greasy crayon areas that you drew on, and it's rejected by the wet areas. And so when you run it through the press, you get an exact, print of what you see on the stone. And the white areas on the stone are, of course, the white areas on the paper. So there is an article, or no, there's a video in Read Watch This about Henri Damier and his route Transnonian. I hope I pronounced that right. This, as you can see, is kind of a journalistic, maybe a little bit on the sensational side of journalism, but it's depicting a murder scene, and this would have been printed in the newspapers or the magazines to, tell the story of a horrific incident that occurred. This was how journalism was done back before we had cameras, which of course can be much, much more objective. Okay. And one of everybody's favorite lithograph artists is Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, with his very famous posters for the Moulin Rouge in Paris. And so one of the things that's interesting about these is they were not really designed to be art. They were advertisements, but people started tearing them down from the walls. They would be plastered all over Paris, and people started tearing them down and keeping them. And of course, the ones that exist now are very rare, very fragile, but collector's items. So finally, we have screen printing. If you have ever owned a t-shirt that had some kind of logo printed on the front, you are the proud owner of a screen print. An image is created on a piece of silk screen, and the parts that are not to receive ink are blocked out. So you put ink on the screen and you push it through with a squeegee, and only the areas that are not blocked through, let the ink pass through the silk screen and onto your t-shirt. And there's a short video about Ed Ruscha for you to watch in this week's Read Watch This. So these were our 4 types of printmaking.